I've always had an issue with procrastination, leaving work until the very last moment to do so. And in fact, that was the topic of my speech I did last year. So this year, I promised to myself, instead of finishing my speech the evening before my speech, I decided to brainstorm for the topic of my speech a month before. So there I was, thinking, what on earth could I possibly talk about? AI? No, too trendy. History? Not now. Procrastination? Not again. Cliche topics just kept swimming through my head. But that's when the thought came to me. If cliche topics is all I could think about, why don't I just talk about cliche? So here we are. First, a little introduction. Originating from the 1800s, cliché was a word borrowed from the French printing industry, which used to refer to a piece of metal that was used to print the same thing over and over and over again. Similar to how clichés portray a stereotype, a saying, idea, or element of artistic works that become overused. The most prominent examples of cliché include phrases such as thinking outside the box, or love at first sight, or follow your heart. These phrases have been so deeply engraved into what it means to be human, yet nowadays whenever we hear them, we cringe, frown, or laugh upon them. So why is that? Well, clichés can be described as attempts made by humans to seek to express universal truths and shared experiences. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I wrote that quote myself. However, that line is particularly insightful into understanding why clichés are so neglected. Now, it is without a doubt that many experiences are shared by people across the globe. Experiences such as school, homework, careers, love. Therefore, naturally, some forms of media will try to capture that and to reflect upon that common theme. However, the nature by which clichés are formed, emphasis on shortcuts, meant that clichés often neglect nuances that make human experiences unique and engaging. Real-life events have far more factors that either directly or indirectly affects the progress of an event, which clichés simply do not address. The hero doesn't need to save the world. The hero could be literally doing anything else other than saving the world. Which is the same reason why some stories feel hollow and ingenuine. Things are happening for the sake of happening, and not for legitimate reason. The negligence of minute details also causes clichés to feel repetitive, which gets boring fast. Like, when was the last time you saw a bad guy defeat a good guy in a movie? Close to never, right? Sure, there may be interesting characteristics attached to each character. However, the overarching plot doesn't change. Clichés sacrifices creativity for familiarity. A scene that you've seen so many times that you know exactly what to expect, yet have watched for dozens of times. In a similar context, short-form videos that gain millions of views value novelty over the quality of the story themselves, which clichés often lack. Which is why humans tend to prefer newer experiences over the old love triangle or damsel in distress stories that have been played on television for decades. Now that we've understood the negative implications of clichés, let's try and answer this. What are the uses of clichés if they are not engaging? Well, clichés are useful in inducing what's called a shared emotion. An emotion induced by a shared experience, and that experience is often cliché. However, a common distinction we need to make here is that the experience here needs to be caused by a coherent story, and not an illogical or disoriented one. Things should happen for a reason, and not for a logical one. And therefore, the story will therefore appear valid and more likely to resonate with the audience. And the emotions resonated will be more likely heartfelt. So why don't we try and view cliches from a different standpoint? Instead of one of meaningless sayings written for the sake of simplicity, why don't we change our perspective a little? But rather view it as an accumulation of experiences by people around the globe, summarized into short and concise words. Maybe practice makes perfect isn't just a call for hard work, but a genuine embrace to the process of trial and error. Maybe thinking outside the box isn't just a call for creativity, but a genuine embrace on new ideas. Now that we've had a systematic look into cliches, why don't we think about this? Doesn't it seem slightly ironic that my speech about cliché actually began with a cliché itself? As some would describe it, a light bulb moment, when the solution to anything comes into the mind in an instant. Doesn't it seem slightly ironic that my speech about cliché actually relies on the cliché to begin itself? So what should we do? Should this script exist at all? Well, what if we tweaked our approach a little? Instead of disregarding a cliché as unoriginal, the next time you hear one, why don't you dissect it? Try to understand it from inside out, to deconstruct it and understand the essence of the messages being conveyed, and to fill in the blanks ourselves to obtain a more coherent story. Therefore, the next time you hear a cliché, ask yourself this: what truths does it hold for me? Thank you.